Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. I'm here with my co host, Nick Olson. Nick, how are we doing today?
I can't say anything other than great. Vikings are on a five-game winning streak despite even more injuries piling up. So excited to dive into the Saints game. I thought they were going to be a really tough test for us, and this was one where I was expecting us to lose it. So to go into the game and at halftime be up 24-3, and granted we let the Saints back into it, but it was a fairly dominant wire-to-wire win. That was really impressive and makes you feel really confident, not just in the players, but particularly in the coaching on this Vikings team on both sides of the ball. So excited to talk about like exact because like that's what we do is like we talk not just about the players but like the coaching and the schematic tinkering and all that stuff. So this was a fun game, I think, particularly to sort of tease out how Brian Flores is elevating this defense, how Kevin O'Connell is really elevating Josh Dobbs in this offense. So it was a fun game to watch live, and it was a fun game to watch the all 22 of.
Yeah, I think so too. And like the game itself, right? It did feel like it was kind of getting away from the Vikings there at the end, right? And the Saints were in the ability to come back. But what you have to remember about that is the Saints were down 8 like the entire fourth quarter, right? To come back from being down 8, you have to not only score a touchdown, you have to get a 2 point conversion, which is about a 50% probability, and then you have to win the game in overtime, which is another 50% probability, right? So just by those two 50% probabilities, the Vikings have a 75% chance to win the game, and then you take away the percent chance that the Saints don't even get the touchdown in the first place, which they never ended up getting, right? So like even if it felt like a one score game and it felt close, 8 point games are a lot less of a coin flip than they may seem. And I feel like they're a little bit less of a significantly less than a coin flip than like a 7 point game, right? So when the Vikings, and they've had a few of these during, or, past couple years, when the Vikings have that sort of situation, it's really not as dire as it sounds, although it's really, really bad if you end up giving up that touchdown, that 2 point conversion, and losing the game, right? Like that's a really bad situation to be in, and it feels really bad when you do that. But yeah, going back to what you were saying just about the coaching and everything, I think this coaching staff is shown to be phenomenal, but you got to give credit to the players too. Like the scheme elevates the players, but it doesn't replace what they're able to do on the field. So it's really both sides complementing each other.
Totally. Yeah. But really fun to see. And the offense is they're doing new things that they weren't able to do that specifically take advantage of Josh Dobbs' legs. And with that, why don't we dive into it? I thought
Yeah.
this was a really impressive game by Josh Dobbs. I was PFF didn't necessarily agree, but like watching the tape, I was kind of blown away by how good he was.
Mm-hmm.
Not the thing that struck me the most about this performance by Dobbs was the ball placement because the Saints are a man-heavy defense, and that's what we got out of them. And Kevin O'Connell was busting out a lot of the man beaters, and a lot of these Y cross routes to TJ Hockenson downfield, that post route touchdown to TJ Hockenson. Some of these like deep sideline shots, like the ball placement was extraordinary. And the way Dobbs is able to like sync up his footwork with the throw, and granted, he did have like one bad high miss to Hawkinson or whatever that was like, where were you throwing that
So
one?
so that one I think got tipped, but there was
Yeah, that
another
was the one that was
the one on the
yeah.
third down, because I actually went through that. I tweeted out and somebody was like, "Didn't that ball get tipped?" And I was like, "Yes, it absolutely did." But there was one on the third down later in the game where the Vikings dropped back to pass. It went incomplete. He just whiffed on. He like just worm burnered the throw. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
But like overall, like the ball placement was like very like between hitting guys between the numbers in stride. And I thought that was like I think of Dobbs not as like a precision rhythm passer. I think of him as a um playmake like like a budget Russell Wilson or something, like a discount like playmaker who can do some crazy things in the pocket and scrambling. But I don't think of him as like I'm gonna find my guy, move through my progressions, and I'm going to hit guys in stride downfield. But that's what he was this game, and so that was for him to be able to show that. Like I knew we've seen Josh Dobbs make magic happen in the pocket and as a rusher, but for him in this game to like show the accuracy on all those crossing routes, I thought that was particularly impressive and made me feel a lot better about the Josh Dobbs offense. In addition to all the other cool stuff like that, the fake zone read that was actually like a quarterback sweep that Kevin O'Connell
yeah,
like installed. That was a really really cool play
yeah.
design. where because like it shows they understand like when you have a quarterback who can run, you can exploit that by being +1 in the box because now your running back becomes your blocker, and now Ty Chandler's out there blocking for him, and Josh Dobbs going to pick up an easy
Hmm.
chunk of yards. So that there are a number of different routes. I feel like all their kind of flood concept. There were a lot of concepts, high-low concepts, where the low in the concept was Dobbs as a rusher. I feel like they scrapped a lot of those flat routes from the playbook that I'm used to seeing with Kirk Cousins. And now like Dobbs as the rushing threat is just like throw high. If the cornerback drifts back, you just take off. And so
Yeah.
um, it's cool seeing them unlock entire new parts of the offense with a rushing quarterback because obviously Kevin O'Connell, we've seen Kevin O'Connell do a lot of really cool stuff with Kirk Cousins. But this is a whole different kind of offense that we're seeing before. And some of it is unplanned. Some of it is Dobbs, making magic happen, like on that scramble touchdown. But a lot of it is like Kevin O'Connell, like specifically realizing Dobbs has this strength to his game, and there are a lot of old-fashioned NFL coaches who do not want to use like quarterback scrambling or running as part of their design. But like
Hmm.
Kevin O'Connell, mid-season is basically able to install new plays that take advantage of that and adjust the reads and adjust the routes. So seeing all that, I think a lot of credit to Josh Dobbs and the performance he did, but also a lot of credit to Kevin O'Connell and how he's able to remake his offense in his players to put his players in an take advantage of their strengths. So it was really encouraging stuff, and obviously it led to a very explosive offensive performance from the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much with this Dobbs situation. We talked about it a little bit last week, or we talked about it a lot last week. We spent about half an hour on just how impressive Dobbs coming in the Atlanta game was. I think he continues to be really impressive to me. I mean, not only the coaching job by Kevin O'Connell, but just how Dobbs has acclimated to this offense really quickly, because in this game, you don't see him really use his legs unnecessarily. Maybe there was like one or two
Yeah.
where he might have checked down to the flat instead of using his legs, but I'd prefer Dobbs to use his legs rather than checking down into the flat to players who linebackers are probably there and ready to rally against. When Dobbs scrambled in this game, he really had nothing downfield. Like there weren't instances of him being able to do that, and his ability to play in rhythm I thought was really impressive. There are a number of plays that show this, but actually, Dan Orlovsky on ESPN's NFL Live, there was a segment tweeted out. I think you can find it on his Twitter. I know I retweeted it, where he's talking about how Dobbs is operating in the offense at hitting the top of his drop, getting the ball out with one hitch, and progressing through reads quickly and appropriately. And that's absolutely true. That's exactly what Dobbs did in this game. He's able to find the open receivers, progress through the reads that he needs to get through, and then if that's not there, he checks down with his legs. There was a play that where Dobbs scrambled. I think he gained like 6 yards. It was one of the ones where he like didn't get a first down, right? But he opens up, looks to the right, comes back to the middle of the field. He has got two routes in the middle of the field, checks both of those before he begins to scramble. The way he's playing, there was it's a wave route to Hockenson. So that's not in the Shanahan playbook that we have access to, right? But there's an old Sark playbook from Alabama that I pulled up, and it's got this concept called wave, which is basically a high crosser and then a lower crosser behind it on a play action concept or whatever. You've got a post to clear out a deep safety as well. This was the TJ Hockenson play where he got tackled out of bounds and like landed on his ribs and that sort of thing, and he looked really tired on that 2 minute drill. But it's like a 20+ yard play. Dobbs hits his back foot, sees that it's wide open, throws it in rhythm. Um, you know, so that's something the Vikings used earlier this year to success, right? The Vikings have been able to run a very similar offensive structure and then add on the things like the zone read kind of concepts, like running zone read on that 3rd and 2 at the end of the game where Dobbs just barely trips, or he would have gotten the first down pretty clearly. Like, that's a pretty potent weapon to have in a situation where you need to run it. The defense knows you need to run it, but you're still trying to get positive yardage, which is something the Vikings weren't able to do at all in this game in the second half, right? Like, they were almost completely shut out in the run game in the second half. So just all that from like a mental makeup standpoint, and then the footwork that Dobbs has in the pocket, being in this offense for 12 days, getting a feel for the timing is just absurd to me, right? Like, I don't know how he's doing it. It's crazy for him to be able to work the way he is. And that's not to say that he's been a better player than Kirk Cousins was in this offense. Like, I think Kirk was clearly operating at a higher level. There were a couple plays where I thought Kirk might have made a throw and Dobbs didn't. There was a check down to Powell before, I think the check down prior to Greg Joseph's field goal miss. And maybe Kirk doesn't make this throw because Kirk probably would check down in this situation. But Matthew Stafford, there was a backside dig, which was maybe open, maybe not open. You really needed to wait for the player to clear the window of the hook defender, which was Tyrann Mathieu, so he might have read it pretty well. But I guarantee you Stafford's seeing the coverage on that play flooded to the 3 receiver side, which is where Dobbs checked down to, and he's going back to the other side and throwing the backside dig, right? He's a very aggressive quarterback. That's a very aggressive quarterback type of play and requires a high level of understanding of that play, which I'm not sure Dobbs is there yet, right? And then there's like he didn't get punished on the one interceptable pass that he did throw, right, to Addison early in the game, where it was just he was kind of late on it and it also kind of just wasn't there at all. So, there are kinks to work through, but hey, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? Like, if we're going to get those bounces right now, we're going to take them.
Yeah, and look, he hasn't thrown an interception yet, which those will come if his history is any indication. And he's always had a problem with ball security, despite all his magic in the pocket. And I will, it's unfair to hold him to compare him to Kirk Cousins in this, but his processing is like not above average right now, which obviously it wouldn't be. He just got there. He's still learning the playbook, but there's a lot of hitching going on in the backfield that I'm not used to seeing because I'm so used to seeing Kirk, top of his drop, boom, balls out, one hitch, boom, balls out. So like those are limitations in Dobbs's game, and I'm sure they'll crop up going forward. But at the same time, like wow, the ball placement, the playmaking, he's still making reads and he's still able to like get the ball out. And he's not a run first quarterback, but he has that as a tool in his toolbox. He's doing a phenomenal job, and Kevin O'Connell's really putting him in a situation where all his strengths can really shine and all his weaknesses. And I feel like this is an offense that's well set up for a quarterback who needs to do a couple extra hitches because he's still learning the ropes a little bit. Like this is the number one pass protecting offensive line in the NFL according to multiple metrics. PFF's number one highest graded offensive line. Everybody on the line has an average or above average pass blocking grade, and I think all the interior and run blockers, kind of interesting, have a higher pass blocking grade than run blocking grade, which you wouldn't expect, considering like that's like a little bit of a surprise from Bradbury, for example, you think of as more of a run blocker. But I think all their pass protection has really taken a step forward. I think Ingram's pass protection has taken a significant leap forward so far this season. So and Reisner kind of came in as a better pass protector. So if you're going to have a quarterback who you're going to call these play action shots, they've been running a lot of play action with Dobbs, or you're going to have these longer developing things, you're going to allow for a quarterback who can hitch a few times in the pocket. We kind of have the infrastructure to hide those weaknesses, and so I feel like long-winded way of saying like, yeah, this is just another way in which they're putting him in. The coaching staff is putting Dobbs in a situation where his weaknesses are supported and his strengths are allowed to shine. And so I think that's despite the small criticisms I have of his game, I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff to see, especially how they're unlocking this new rushing attack in his offense and how that like changes up not just the dual threat stuff or the QB running playbook, but also how it affects like the route distributions and how now you can put extra guys out there and do extra things with them. So that's all. It makes me really excited, and this isn't just like a flash in the pan thing, but this could be like pretty interesting to watch going forward too. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, in particular with the pass protection, is Dobbs may end up making, in some instances, the pass pro look worse than it really was. There were a few instances in this game, and he just tends to have deeper drops than Kirk does, which Kirk is like maybe the single best quarterback in the league in terms of regulating his drop depth and helping out his offensive tackles, in particular around the edge. By dropping back to like 8 yards and exactly 8 yards and consistently every single time doing that. Dobbs, there was a play where he was at 12 yards, there was a play where he was at 10 plus yards, and like he made it work on those plays. So like that wave play I talked about, he was at 10, 11, 12 yards. He makes a slight shuffle step to one side. It looks like O'Neal got beat, but O'Neal really blocked it to the depth, and Dobbs was able to get the throw off. There was another play where he hitched up big, and I think he threw to TJ Hockenson. he was able to get the throw off. Carl Granderson ended up getting to the spot where Dobbs hit the top of his drop, but that doesn't matter because Dobbs was like 3 yards in front of him after the hitch, right? So it's like Dobbs did work it pretty well when he dropped that deep, but if he drops that deep and holds onto the ball and stays in that spot, it's going to create a problem for the offense. So hopefully we don't see something like that moving forward. The next player we need to shout out on offense is very obviously TJ Hockenson, right? He had like, I mean, I don't know. They always game the splits to say very specific things, right? Like, but TJ Hockenson was the first player with, what was it, like 10 receptions, 125 plus yards and a touchdown in the first half, or the first tight end to ever do that in a game. Which you can tell it's very gamed because there's like three categories, three boxes that you have to check, right, to make him the first player to ever do that. But it's still very cool, right? Especially playing through that rib/oblique injury. And it's like just every time, especially on that 2 minute drill drive, he caught the ball and went to the ground. You can tell he's in very obvious pain, and he just keeps getting up and keeps playing the football game, right? It was like it was kind of funny because Kevin O'Connell said, yeah, we'll probably limit his snap count a little bit in the game, and then he just goes out and has monster volume in the first half. So it's like, really, Kevin, are we really going to limit his snap count and usage? I mean, I think that is true when you look at what he did in the run game and that sort of stuff. Like, we used a lot more Johnny Munt in this game than I think we have in previous games, but just really impressive stuff from Hockenson overall, right? Like, he beat a corner on a stick China route, which is where you go out first, you come back in, got wide open against a corner, ended up getting a first down. There was a third down conversion he had. That was no, I'm sorry, that was the third down conversion. I think it was on 3rd and 6. The wave route I already talked about. He's running away from the defender, ends up getting wide open there. The touchdown was really impressive, right? He's running seam route against a Tampa 2 look from the Saints. So Demario Davis is at the line of scrimmage trying to drop back into being a I'll call it a quote unquote Tampa dropper, right? Which is a deep middle coverage by the linebacker typically in Tampa 2. That's what the unique change to it was. It kind of acts like a deep third player. So if you're running a seam against that's really to take away the seam route. Like, that's the point of that coverage. But TJ Hockenson was just faster than Demario Davis to get depth, so it ended up being really pretty open, and Dobbs was able to easily layer the throw over Davis's hands on that play, right? But that's the benefit that Hockenson's speed gives you. And he had a couple contested catch losses earlier in the game. Those were great plays by Alontae Taylor, who was the cornerback. Like, he did a really good job getting his hand in there and disrupting Hockenson at the catch point on both situations. The second one, Hockenson wasn't quite as fast as he needed to beat Alontae Taylor, but that's why he's a tight end and not a corner, right? He's still fast enough to win up the seam on that Tampa 2 play, and that's exactly what you want from your high-paid premium tight end, and it's what Hockenson gave you in this game, I think.
Yes, it's interesting talking about the high paid stuff because a lot of people, there was a lot of consternation when Hockenson was assigned to this extension where he was for a brief moment the highest paid tight end in
I
the
mean, there
in the
was
league.
consternation early in this game when he didn't get those 2 contested catches.
Yeah, but then he goes out and shows you like all the other things he can do that's just such a special player. The way he moves, those choice routes he runs are just money every single time. The wiggle he has on that post route to kind of set up the safety a little bit and allow him to give himself leverage. He's so good at establishing leverage in his routes because he has like the hip swivel of a small wide receiver and like a 6'6" tight end body. That's just not something you see very often. While also still having, I mean, he's not like a Vernon Davis type, but he has enough speed to threaten the post on that touchdown route, threaten the seam out of a 3-point stance. Just a special combination of receiving skills. He's fifth among tight ends in yards per route run, which is, he's not like Travis Kelce or like Trey McBride, or more like, more pure. They're not wide tight ends exactly. And he's first among tight ends in receptions. He's first among tight ends in first downs. His yards per route run is higher than Jordan Addison's, which, to talk about how incredible Jordan Addison has been. Like, TJ Hawkinson's been even more valuable to the offense when he's out there. So his ability to like get all this stuff done, And to do all this, well, he's got what, like two bruised ribs or something. Like he can
Yeah,
barely like stand when he's going out there. The toughness was a really, really encouraging game from him. And he's just such a mismatch weapon because of that unique skill set he has. So really exciting stuff to see from him. And the great thing about tight ends is like they just like they mature like a fine wine. You know, like Travis Kelce is like almost a decade older than TJ Hockenson. So I feel like Hawkinson's continuing to get a little bit better. It's that kind of like that baseline athleticism that makes him like talented as a receiver. But as you get a little, as you sort of as tight ends age, they get a little bit better as blockers, and I feel like they learn a little bit more of the route nuance. So I think Hawkinson's game is going to continue to be something that's going to make Vikings football fun to watch for the next 5+ years. So really excited to see him live out his contract, no matter how expensive people may have thought it was at one point.
yeah. No, it's absolutely worth it. I mean, I think you look at the Hockenson trade, right? And to me, it kind of feels like the Jefferson Diggs trade, right? With the Bills, where the Vikings are on kind of the Diggs side of this with Hockenson, right? We spent the picks, but we didn't even spend that much. And the difference with the comparison, right, is Sam Laporta is playing great for the Lions. Sam Laporta was drafted with the 34th overall pick. The Lions got like the 53rd pick from our trade, right? So it's not like he was even in play.
And we got picks back.
And we got
It was a
picks back.
free roll.
The Bills is kind of a 1-to-1 comparison because the Vikings took Jefferson with the Diggs pick, right? And you can't say like, oh well, the Bills should have known Justin Jefferson was going to be an absolute world beater, right? Like that's not reasonable. I think saying the Bills won the trade from their perspective isn't unfair. Like Stephon Diggs is an absolutely phenomenal receiver, and he really broke out once he got to Buffalo, right? Like I think they made a good evaluation there and made a good move for what their team needed in terms of a veteran receiver. And I think that's true for the Vikings too. Like the Lions didn't have a great roster and they needed more draft capital, so they increased their draft capital by making the trade. They weren't planning on extending TJ Hockenson for whatever reason it seemed like, right? The Vikings, if you look in the context of last year, they only had one loss at the point where they traded for him, right? They were like 5-1, 6-1. They were clearly in the thick of the playoffs. They needed a tight end because the Irv Smith experiment hadn't worked out. All else we had was Johnny Munt. So you look at TJ Hockenson as a long-term investment. I think it was a great move for the team overall, right? Because it helped them win last year, and it's going to help them win for years moving forward. So I think overall kind of a win-win trade there in the NFL, right? Like I think it doesn't have to be a winner and a loser in a trade. I think both teams can benefit from the scenario as it was.
Yeah, I'm sure Lions aren't missing TJ Hawkinson too much. At the same time, TJ Hawkinson has become a much better player under the Vikings coaching staff than he was in Detroit. So that's not he wasn't a bad player in Detroit. I think he was a Pro Bowler in Detroit. But like he's ascended to an even better player. Part of that is scheme, a little bit more zone blocking than gap blocking because especially when he's lined up in line, you don't necessarily want to. He's not going to drive.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to win drive blocks against defensive linemen very often. So part of that scheme, but also part of that is like Kevin O'Connell's really good at seeing what his players are good at and putting them in like all these wide choice routes. Um, he's so money on those, so we run a lot of them and we just spam them, and it's like great every time. Especially when you have that chemistry with the quarterback, because the great thing about a choice route is you make the coverage wrong, but because you just go the way that they're not. So, yeah, I love Hawkinson. There was we talked a little bit early about this about how it was kind of frustrating how we let the Saints creep back into that. And I saw a lot of people during the game very mad
Yes.
at Kevin O'Connell and the play calling specifically. As much as we love Kevin O'Connell, they kind of felt like they turtled up. They didn't like continue to pour it down their throats. And I saw you tweeting about this, Matt. So do you think like we turtled up in the second half? Should we have gotten more aggressive, or did we just sort of do the prevent offense for the second half, and was that what allowed the Saints to claw their way back into it?
So we had a bunch of drives in the second half, right? And I think if you want to say the last two drive, like the second and third drive from the last drive, right, where I think it was run pass, like a passing play. That was that incompletion to Hockenson that I was talking about, actually, I believe. And then run, right, where we ran the draw play. That to me is absolutely turtling as an offense, right? Like the Vikings did do that in those scenarios. But at the end of the day, like the times before that, I really don't think they did, right? The first drive of the half, they went down the field, they ended up kicking a field goal, a 33-yard field goal. The second drive of the half, they ended up going 3-and-out, I believe, but the 3-and-out was when Josh Dobbs, looked like he extended for the first down, but they didn't give it to him live, right? And maybe it's a question of should Kevin O'Connell have thrown the challenge flag there? I think it was probably a good no challenge to save it for a more critical game changing play, which I think the potential fumble at the end where he did end up challenging is more critical than getting that 3rd-and-1, right? Because at that time, you still have the length of the field to go. And whether or not he should have used his challenge in the first half, he did. So I do think it makes sense to conserve that, because even if you win that Josh Dobbs challenge, now you have no challenges for the rest of the game, right? Which is a quarter and a half. And that's really hard as a coach if something critical does happen that you absolutely need a challenge to kind of stomach if you kind of wasted it on maybe converting a first down. And given that, I don't think you go for it in that situation. I mean, you're so backed up in your own territory. Maybe the numbers do say you should go for it from an analytics perspective, but in terms of like that level of being aggressive, I'm not sure I'm fully there, right? Outside of that, like I thought they did a pretty decent job. So let me pull it up here again. On the missed field goal, they ran 4 pass plays and 2 runs, right? They were on the fringe of field goal range to start, but it wasn't like they were running the entire time there, right? And then the final drive before that 2-drive sequence, they ended up getting knocked out of field goal range on a play where they scored a touchdown, right? On the Ty Chandler run that busted for a touchdown. They get holding, they get sacked on the next play. One minor criticism of Kevin O'Connell that I do want to put in here is I don't think we had a good answer on the play where Dobbs got sacked. The Saints ran a 0 blitz. We run a ton of 0 blitzes, right? I think in that situation, the primary goal should be gain yards to get yourself back into field goal range. The ball was at the 41. The line to gain was at the 30, I want to say. Maybe it was the 42 and 31. I think it was a 32-yard run by Chandler on the not touchdown. So, but that's well into field goal range. You can put yourself up by 2 scores if you gain 5 to 6 yards. So the Vikings ran routes that all broke at the sticks or were intended to go at or past the sticks. They should have had a hot adjustment when the slot corner blitzed to be able to get a quick pass off, gain 5 or 6 yards, and give themselves a chance at a field goal instead of taking a sack and punting. Dobbs, when he hits the top of his drop, has nobody open because the Saints are playing sticks coverage on the play, and the routes haven't broken yet. So he's got to try to step up in the pocket, and it's just completely collapsed. I mean, there was one more blitzer than there was pass protector. That's the point of a 0 blitz, right? We run that all the time on defense. We should be very well aware of what that does to the offense. So at the end of the day, I think there just wasn't a good enough answer given to Dobbs. And maybe that's a adjustment that I don't know. It seems like we haven't had those kind of hot adjustments all season, right? And it's worked out generally for us, but there have been instances where it's bitten us as well. So, like, I think Hockenson should just run a hot route on that play. I don't really have a better answer than that. But, so to answer your question, did the Vikings offense turtle up a little bit? Yeah, kind of, but we talked about the win probability in the beginning. They weren't that far off. And also, that very final drive, I'm totally fine with the Vikings running 3 times. The Saints got the ball back with 6 seconds left on the clock. Like that's kind of a nothing burger to me, right? They needed a Hail Mary to win the game. If you put yourself in a situation where your opponent needs to make a Hail Mary to win a football game and also make a 2-point conversion and also win in overtime, right? Given that circumstance, I'm very okay with you not running a pass on that final 3 plays when you can get that guaranteed.
Yeah, their win probability didn't dip below the 85% for the entire second half. The only time it really dipped below 88, 90% was it was that 3rd down they converted to Brandon Powell. So that like made a jump back up above 90. But for the most part, it felt like because we're all traumatized Minnesota sports fans or Vikings fans, we've seen all kinds of crazy things happen. But they were in control. It's interesting, especially talking about like the 4th down and the 2-point conversions. I feel like Kevin O'Connell was more aggressive on that stuff in years past. Particularly with Kwesi taking over as GM, you kind of expect more analytic savviness, which tells you to go for it more often. The NFL meta isn't quite there. Go for it on fourth downs. Go for the 2-point conversion. The go for two when you're down 7 so that you get 2 bites at the apple
Mm-hmm.
because of the marginal increase in win probability or whatever. All that stuff. And we haven't necessarily seen that at the same time. Um, if it's not broken, no need to fix it. And here they came away with a win. So I do think, when we're talking about like coach of the year, I do think these things matter. And I do feel like he's leaving money on the table, Kevin O'Connell is, by not being more aggressive in these situations across all categories of risk that I want my coach to be aggressive on: fourth down decisions, third down decisions,
Mm-hmm.
pass preference. Although, in Kevin O'Connell's credit, he has continued to be very, very pass heavy and very play action heavy, which things analytics like. Even though he switched to Josh Dobbs in a quarter, you would think if there were ever
Yes.
a time to be more run heavy, it would be you just got this guy and he just got here.
Well, our run
And
game
you're
is
going to lean
bad,
on.
so that probably doesn't help.
That's
But
part of it, yeah. But he's still going out there and chucking it. So um, all that to say, like, yeah, I want them to be more aggressive. At the same time, I'm not. It's a fault, but I'm not losing sleep over it or anything. And I also feel like the fan experience makes it feel much more acute than the actual risk that you're or the win probability you're leaving on the table actually is. So. Um, at the very end, when they were actually kind of just like run, run, run punting, like at that point though, the game was pretty much almost sealed. So
yeah,
that was the worst of it. But at the same time, that was when it was like the least concerning to me. So
yeah,
I can.
that's kind of exactly how I feel about it. Like you tried to score points. Like they very clearly tried to score points, and they struggled to do that. So they kind of shifted to just running the clock out. Maybe you should just keep trying to score points. You probably should from like a true analytics win probability perspective, but at the same time, like, it's kind of rough. And I will say, in terms of Kevin O'Connell going forward and stuff like that, like the Vikings, I think were one of the most aggressive teams over the first 5 weeks in terms of going forward. I remember at one point, like 6% of our first downs, which seemed like the most in the league, came on fourth down. So the Vikings were going for it very much early on. And I think, for O'Connell, it's probably a function of where they are in the game, right? When they're up, he seems to be a little bit more conservative in terms of how he plays things. But when they're down, he's very aggressive in terms of going for it, particularly like in that kind of no man's land, like 40-yard range when it's like fourth and short or fourth and like 4 or something like that. Like he's very willing to go for it in that scenario. So it is kind of an interesting dichotomy there from him. Um,
One last thing I wanted to hit before we turn it over to the defense,
yeah.
but with the Cam Akers injury, there's a bit of a running back controversy
Oh my
right
god.
now. And I saw right before we hopped on, I tweeted out you were getting a little beaten up in your response in your
I've
reply to
been
the.
fighting on Twitter all day, well, like for the past 3 days about this, but you know,
But look, I like Ty Chandler. There was one run in particular where side it was like wide zone, and it was kind of perfectly blocked up for him to go through the C gap between Josh Oliver and Christian Darrisaw and Reisner, and instead he decided to bounce it out when like there was the end man on the line of scrimmage was on the other side of Josh Oliver, and it could have been. He would have been one on one with the safety with possible, like 10 plus yards from that run. Instead, he bounces it outside to the sideline and gets like 2 or 3. And I'm like, oh, that's why I guess Ty Chandler was not getting a run and why they traded for Cam Akers and why, like we haven't seen a lot of him. He did show, he was able to like on some of the like the GY counter stuff earlier in the game. He got a very solid pickup on that, like
yeah,
10 yards or something. And he had like a couple other like the shotgun inside zone stuff where so he's not incapable of running between the tackles, but at the same time, Mattison is so much more um, consistent in his vision and just like taking what's ahead of him and reading things well. So I'm personally of the opinion that like there's there Chandler has more juice and I like juice, but like give me my number one thing I'm looking for with my running back is avoid negative plays, keep the offense on schedule. If you can like give me explosives, that's great, but I would prefer the guy who gives me like a consistent 4 yards per carry than somebody who gives me 0.808. And Ty Chandler's more of the latter. So
yeah.
I don't. Did you have any thoughts on their run on our running back stable? We got a little kind of long one
I
too.
have a lot of thoughts on our running back stable on Madison versus Chandler specifically. So ultimately the thing is I don't think either of them are like top half of the league running backs. Like very clearly not. I just think that Alexander Mattison is a better running back than Ty Chandler is right now. And like it makes sense why the Vikings were starting Alexander Mattison, why they traded for Cam Akers instead of having Chandler as the second back, and why Mattison was still the lead back, through the Atlanta game and was the lead back heading into this game. Ultimately with Chandler, like I think his burst is great, and I thought Akers' burst was great. I think Chandler has more burst than Akers. You saw the Vikings liked to use Chandler on gadget type plays earlier in the season, right? That one big screen there called back, or maybe that was a different play or whatever. It was for the illegal blocking downfield on KJ Osborne, like offensive pass interference. I forget which game it was in. It was a couple weeks ago. It was in the San Francisco game, and then we busted the big screen to Akers on like the next play.
Mhm.
But they were using him in space, and I think that Chandler has the ability to be very effective when he has clean reads and clean space in front of him. I looked at all of Chandler's successful plays. By the way, 15 carries, 5 successful plays. That's a 33% success rate in this game. He did have the touchdown that was taken away. Also, that touchdown, wide open blocking. Like Chandler was very effective in using his speed, and the Vikings, in place that they called for him, used his speed. There was a wineback that hit the edge. He only ended up getting 4 yards on it, but he very successfully hit the edge. The power plays, there were two in the middle, the cleanest blocked plays in the game from the Vikings, in my opinion. And I think there is some credit for hitting the hole hard, hitting the hole fast, and getting that done, right? The touchdown run, obviously, like Risner does get knocked multiple yards in the backfield there, and I'm not sure Mattison scores that touchdown because Chandler's speed allows him to get the edge immediately. I think, honestly, it's blocked well enough, and the Saints are out leveraged to the point where I think Mattison does get the touchdown on that play, but it's definitely closer with the way that I think it was Risner got knocked back into the backfield there. So, like, Chandler does deserve credit there. I don't think the Vikings like him in pass protection. They really didn't use him in pass protection at all in this game. And Mattison had a couple nice pass protection reps. And he just doesn't read the game consistently. There was that outside zone play that you talked about. There were a couple other plays that I've stepped back. Like the one I thought was probably his fault, but it's kind of a murky situation and bad blocking later in the game. On those two drives where the Vikings went run, punt, basically. Um, One was a pitch play where really I think he should have cut it back up, but he takes it because the safety, who was in like maybe it was like the D gap, and then we had like two tight ends, so there was the E gap outside of it, right? The safety leaves his gap to run towards the outside, and Chandler takes the aggressive play when he could have cut back into the gap that the safety vacated, basically. I'm not sure that's totally on him. There was another on power where Risner doesn't think he's going to be able to get around and get to the linebacker. So he kind of cuts underneath it and doesn't make the block, right? That's like an athleticism problem for Risner, kind of. The Saints were playing it very aggressively, but Chandler follows Ham, who was the lead blocker on this power play, right? And just gets crunched by Demario Davis at the line of scrimmage, who rushed to the outside. If he cuts that back up behind Risner by reading Risner's block, it's a more successful play. It probably wasn't a good play. Honestly, there wasn't really much there anywhere, but it's a more successful play. I think that is the sort of stuff that the coaching staff is seeing from Chandler in practice that means he wasn't on the field. So if you look at it overall, like Chandler had these nice explosive runs, right? And it's an exciting element to see, and it's especially exciting when you see it kind of from the side angle where it's like you can tell he's getting vertical ground quickly, right? Which is not something you see with Mattison at all. But Mattison just had the capacity to find space more easily. And I don't think that that means that Mattison is like the best back in the NFL, but I think it makes sense why we signed him to be a starter, because he can do things competently and not be just a negative out there on the field. I think with Chandler, we're going to see a lot more negative plays on the field from the Vikings than we did with Mattison, even if we saw a lot of negative plays with Mattison, because I don't think the run blocking is nearly as good as PFF says it is. And I think that's another problem with this whole discussion, is that PFF is really high on the Vikings run blocking, and there are so many plays that there really just isn't anything there.
Yeah, guys, it's funny. The way PFF makes blocks is like you'll have like somebody off screen make like a dominant plus 1.5 block, but it's like they're not really in the read or whatever. So that's cool. But or you'll have two guys make great blocks and one guy who's like the critical block, like just whiff or hit or miss it, and you'll get somebody hit in the backfield. So I agree with you. I don't think Mattison is good, but I do think he is consistent, and vision is just so important. If you can't run through the right hole, like that's you're not going to have a successful rushing scheme. Like it's like designing like a perfect like play call, and but your quarterback will throw it to the wrong guy every time or something. Like it's just you need to have a running back who's able to
Yeah.
make those right reads. And Mattison is simply more. It sounds funny because he's had many high profile like bad reads with his vision, and I'm not going about to say like he's got like elite, vision. Mattison has elite vision or anything, but he has good vision, and I feel like he doesn't screw up very often. And I feel like the Ty Chandler vision is like that was a bad miss on that outside zone. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like Mattison has misses, but they're usually not that bad. So I get it. Obviously, Madison's now hurt, so we signed Miles Gaskin. So now it's even more of like the hits
Yeah.
keep coming, the injuries keep coming. So we'll see what happens going forward. But yeah, I appreciate what Chandler brings to the table. I also don't think he's close to being a complete back that you want to give a lot of snaps to necessarily. As fun as the juice and the electricity that he brings to the game are.
I want the running game for this Vikings team to tank the offense as little as possible. That's my preference right now, right? Like I don't care about the explosives. I just want like the highest success rate we can get, because the passing offense is so good that I just want the run game to not put them in complete garbage situations. And I think ultimately with who they are as players right now, you're going to end up with worse, but with a worse success rate from Chandler than you are with Mattison. Maybe I'm wrong in that opinion. Maybe the Vikings are able to do a little bit more power gap stuff with Chandler where he doesn't have to read it out and he can just play fast and hit those holes, and it works out for them. Maybe I'm wrong about Mattison not missing reads on a consistent basis, but it's like I know that Mattison has these high profile misreads, right? And I think if you're listening to us right now, you probably understand that we go through and like we're not like we're watching every single play when we go and watch the tape, and Mattison does not miss plays at an egregious rate. I thought Cam Akers' worst missed reads worse than significantly notably worse than Mattison does. I think Ty Chandler is going to miss reads notably worse than Mattison does. Just based on my impression from those guys. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Ty Chandler does come out and astound us. But it's just like, to me, I understand why the coaching staff had Mattison as the starter. And I think that will probably bear out as correct as we see more Ty Chandler, with Mattison coming back from a concussion. So Mattison, I suppose, theoretically could come back this week, but I think the Vikings are playing it pretty safe with concussions with players. It sounded like KJ Osborne was going to be available to come back this week, like he had cleared concussion protocol, and then it was a team player decision combination to keep him out of the game to make sure he's fully recovered from that injury. So we're probably going to get a good look this week against a Denver defense that hopefully isn't all that great. But let's flip it over to the defensive side of the ball here. And I thought, if the offense really jumped out to the lead in the first half, 24-3, right? The defense played great in the first half. First of all, right? That's why the Saints only had 3 points, but they really held it down in the second half and prevented the Saints from coming back. We talked about the frustrating 3-and-outs, and they prevented the Saints from scoring that final touchdown to win the game. So something that was interesting is the Vikings had their lowest blitz rate of the year. It's kind of been fluctuating up and down. You had a really, really high, like a massively high blitz game against the Bears. You had a high blitz game against the 49ers. And then each of the past 3 weeks, like I think the Packers was exactly 50%. Last week was hovering around 40% against Atlanta. And then this past week against the Saints, I saw from Kevin Seifert that it was at 20% from ESPN Stats and Info. PFF seemed to have a little bit of a higher blitz rate. Notably, the Vikings blitzed Carr less often than they did Winston once Jameis came in the game. So it probably is quarterback specific in terms of how much they like to blitz, but they still blitzed Jameis less than 40% of the time, I believe, on his dropbacks per PFF. So, kind of an interesting change up from Flores this year. A lot more drop 8 coverage. I mean, still a ton of drop 8 coverages, right? And it's like, the Vikings blitz rate wasn't nothing. Like, some teams are what the Vikings blitzed at on average in terms of their blitz over the course of the entire season, right? Like, it's probably more of an average blitz rate for an NFL team. But it really was, it's been cool to see him switch it up and vary it based on the opponents that they have. Um Sorry about that. It seems like Nick dropped off the call for a second. Nick, you're back. I was talking about the Vikings blitz rate.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, the thing that struck me with this Flores game plan was I saw a lot of simulated pressures and creepers against Derek Carr that I'm not used to
yes.
seeing. And it feels like this is a little mean, but it feels like Brian Flores is like, I don't need to blitz Derek Carr because he's already going to be conservative and see ghosts a little bit. That I don't need to like send a house against him because Derek Carr does have a little bit of a reputation for the Alex Smith or like the young Kirk Cousins. Like Derek Carr's average depth of target in this game was 5 yards. Then Jameis came out and it was more than 3 times as much. Part of that is like game situation, but like you couldn't have more different quarterbacks in terms of like conservative versus aggressive in terms of how far they're pushing it down the field. So yeah, with Derek Carr, you can get pressure without needing to send additional guys, and I think that was kind of Flores's strategy a little bit. Was he was like, I don't need to send 5, 6 guys. Let me send 3 in Harrison Smith on like a sim pressure, or let me send 3 in like Jordan Hicks or something. That I feel like it was kind of a unique game plan that I think is specific to Derek Carr. And that's what good defensive coaching is. It's like you don't just blitz for the sake of blitzing, but you blitz because, hey, like this is the way we can limit what the quarterback does, or this quarterback does worse against pressure, or this blitz look. The other thing that really struck me is they didn't need to blitz because they were so good at manipulating the Saints pass protection rules that they
Yes.
didn't need to send additional guys. Like, how many times did Metellus just have like a free shot at the quarterback? So many times in this game. And part of that was they're so good at timing the snap and waiting to declare, like wait until the quarterback hitches that knee up to say, hey, I'm ready for the snap. And
Also,
that's when they finally declare.
Metellus 8 running backs alive in this game.
Yeah. Yeah, the way he's able to like absorb contact and just sort of like keep running at the quarterback, really incredible. I mean, there were a couple times where like Kamara would like cut block and dive at his knees, and Mattel somehow just like not only stays upright but like continues his momentum towards the quarterback. So, I think part of the reason Flores is blitzing a lot is because like these secondary guys that they have, and Ivan Pace and Josh Metellus and Harrison Smith, they're not like Daniil Hunter, but you get them one-on-one with a running back, and these guys get home. So he's putting them in a situation to good coaching is putting your players, emphasizing the things they do well and allowing them to be put in situations where they can show it off, and that's kind of what they're doing. So I did maybe just spend a moment on it in a little more particularity, like. Before offenses, every time the center lines up, he'll call out the mic and he'll set the
Yep.
protection based on who the mic is. And so a lot of the times, like the Vikings would respond to that and say, like, okay, I'm going to have Harrison Smith line up as like a 2-eye, but then as soon as the quarterback gets ready to snap, Harrison Phillips was going to move over to a zero technique so that way he can completely occupy the center. We know that they're doing a half slide based on their calling like the mic on this guy. And that'll allow Josh Metellus, who only creeps down to the line of scrimmage at the very end, so he's not in the protection call when they call the mic. It allows Metellus to sort of get that free rusher up the A gap. And that's going back to Mike Zimmer. Pressure up the A gap is the most dangerous for the quarterback because it's the straightest line, it's the quickest route to the quarterback. So if you can scheme that up consistently, quarterback really has no chance to do anything. So I spent a lot of we spent a lot of time talking about all the great things Kevin O'Connell did on the offensive side, but I think particularly being able to scheme up free rushers without taking away guys in the holes in the zones in coverage. That it was a really impressive job, and I feel like going forward, every running back is just gonna like their head is gonna be spinning trying to figure out like how do I stop this Brian Flores thing, these blitzes because he tests them and like there were mistakes that Kamara made and some of their backs made in like pass protection that allowed guys to get home. So
Yep.
it was really impressive stuff from Flores and the entire pass rush team unit as a whole.
Yeah, it was awesome stuff. And those late shifts actually have another benefit, right? Because they've caused false starts. They actually caused multiple false starts in this game. They caused a false start and that first and goal last week. You were the first person I saw call it out. I don't know if you caught it before Brian Flores' press conference last week or after, but and I don't know if you actually caught that press conference at all, but he mentioned during that press conference that Harrison Phillips is the shift coordinator. He might have called it the STEM coordinator. I can't remember. For those late defensive line shifts. So he actually calls out when they're supposed to shift, and it's worked really well in the past couple of games because what they do is they move laterally, right? To what you said, Phillips might move from a 2-eye to a 0 technique or something like that. They move laterally, and in those critical situations, the opposing offense is very much on edge, right? They're trying to get any sort of advantage they can in a 4th-and-1 situation because they want to drive your opponent off the ball. That's how you convert those downs. On 1st and goal, that's how you convert those downs. So when they see the player in front of them move, they're more likely to flinch in that situation than they would be on a normal down. Rashid Shaheed got it once because he was actually watching the ball, saw like 3 Vikings move violently at once, and that just caused a natural reaction in him, right? Like it just kind of caused the jump reaction. The other time, on the 4th-and-1 where the Saints were going to go for it with Taysom Hill in the backfield, the left tackle and the right guard and the left guard both went. So credit to you, Nick. I think you were the first person to call it out in both games. If you hadn't seen that Flores thing.
Yeah, and Flores didn't like invent it. It's not the first time somebody
Sure.
does like a late shift. But the how it's really effective because it's like the coordination and the suddenness, which is like you also
Mm-hmm.
have to be careful about it because you can't just like jerk for the sake of jerking and feinting an offsides because defenses can actually get like called delay of game penalties against them
Yes.
if they do that. It happened last year to I think the Eagles where like somebody like stepped into the neutral zone or something and it was called delay of game because it caused the offense to false start. You can't like cause the offense to false start, but if you're doing a legal football move, which is a shift is a legal move, then if the offense flinches or false starts, that's completely legal and it's on the offense. And I feel like it's like clever chicanery. Like, Brian Flores spent some time with a rule book this offseason to figure out like, hey, if I coordinate like 3 guys making a very big sudden, and that's the other thing too. Like these are not like I'm moving one technique over. Like Harrison Phillips will like move over a gap and a half with these shifts. So like you'll have 3 guys make very quick sudden moves. It looks like the defense is getting ready to snap, except it's just a shift but it's causing guys to false start pretty consistently now in very critical downs. So last week it was 1st-and-1 from the 1 yard line at the goal line. This week it was a 4th-and-1 at midfield where
Mm-hmm.
they were totally ready to go for it. Both of those situations last week, we get a false start. It was a big part in that getting them to holding them to a field goal on the drive that started at the 1 yard line. And then this week, the 4th-and-1 false start. After that, they got the false start. They punted it, so that it was basically a turnover out of this turnover, and then 4 points last week. So it's a little thing, but like a lot of those little coaching things add up, and the way they're able to do it is like really cool, and the way that like it also like it dovetails and has a synergy with like everything else Brian Flores does as a blitzer. Like I don't think if like Ed Donatel were doing these late shifts or whatever, it would have the same effect because like with Brian Flores, everybody's always really worried about like minding their P's and Q's in protection and who am I protecting and who am I blocking and who's going to be in my gap or whatever. So the fact that like Flores is constantly throwing crap at you that like on these short yardage situations you're particularly on edge, it kind of all fits together. So really good coaching and good stuff.
Yeah. So the next thing we wanted to talk about, and this is maybe more of a minor point, but I think it's just something that exudes the what Flores has instilled in this defense is the Vikings were great tackling, particularly on quick passes in this game. Ivan Pace did it again, right? Where he had a situation on the screen where he beat two linemen. Caleb Evans also deserves a ton of credit on that play in particular for coming around the edge on the screen and making the tackle on Kamara. The other screen that the Saints tried to run to Kamara was a similar result. Mekhi Blackmon came around the edge and made a tackle, which is great because those Kamara screens are really effective for the Saints in general. Like, he's always been a really effective weapon in the passing game, and the Vikings just completely shut that down in this game. I wrote an article for Zone Coverage. It'll come out. It'll probably be out before you hear this if you listen in the morning. If you listen to it overnight, it'll come out Wednesday morning. But in doing that, it was talking about Flores' defense in general. But in doing that, I found out the Vikings allowed only 3.2 yards after the catch per play in this game. If you look at NFL teams over the course of the season, the worst is the Carolina Panthers. Like, most teams hover around 5 in terms of yards after the catch per play. The worst is the Carolina Panthers at 4.2. Right, and they have absolutely nobody in their receiving core. I mean, we know that. We saw that earlier in the year. Nobody who can create anything kind of has any sort of wiggle on that team. So that's not surprising. This was worse than that by a full yard, right? So that's just a really impressive performance by the Vikings of clicking and closing on those plays and in those situations. And every single player on the defense got in on it. It was crazy. Like, Harrison Smith had a play. Troy Dye coming in, helping replace Jordan Hicks, who was injured for most of the game. On that play where Kevin O'Connell challenged and it got ruled a catch and then down by contact, that was Troy Dye making that play. Mekhi Blackmon, Andrew Booth, Byron Murphy on that screen early in the game hit it immediately. It was a tackle for a loss against Rashid Shaheed, who's also a very effective screen player, right? And extremely fast. Who am I missing? Theo Jackson made a play. I think the only one who didn't was Cam Bynum, who's playing deep almost the entire game, right? So he never had an opportunity to make the play. And he made a tackle around the line of scrimmage in the run game. So it was really just an impressive all-around performance by the Vikings defense and secondary tackling in this game for me. And I just wanted to shout that out. Like, that's what made Carr's low ADOT not effective and why the Saints weren't scoring any points early in the game. So with that, sorry, Nick's been having internet troubles throughout the whole podcast a little bit, it appears. But we're going to flip it over to some of the coverage disguises that Flores ran, because this runs hand in hand with the blitzes we were talking about earlier, right? The one that stands out to me in particular against Carr was one in the third quarter. It was when Jonathan Bullard got his strip sack. And on that play, the Vikings were in a cover 3 shell at the snap, right? And they flipped to Tampa 2. So in cover 3, you are expecting the outside corners to play deep third zones. The Saints had vertical routes on both of the outside plays. And you have the deep safety over the middle. What you want to do against cover 3 is work the high-low that the Saints had, which was basically a drive concept. You had a crossing route coming low underneath, and then you had a dig by a tight end behind it. The thing was, in Tampa 2, you actually have linebackers at 2 different levels. So Ivan Pace was the Tampa player. He was deeper. He was covering the dig. They were covering the drive underneath. So Carr thinks it's cover 3 pre-snap. That's what he diagnoses. Doesn't change or reconfirm his diagnosis post-snap. Sees that nothing's over the middle, holds onto the ball, kind of panics, doesn't get anything there. Meanwhile, with the 2 cover 2 safeties, both of the seam routes were like wide open. I think it would have been a touchdown if he'd seen it and thrown it, honestly. Maybe his eyes bring the player over. Byron Murphy drops back into a deep half zone. Cameron Bynum runs from the middle of the field all the way over to the right. But honestly, I think he probably could have had a touchdown on that play, and it turned into a strip sack, which unfortunately the Saints recovered, of course, because the Vikings can't recover a fumble to save their lives. But just a really neat coverage disguise, and he was doing that all day, and it threw Carr through a loop. I mean, honestly, I would probably expect a player with the experience of Carr to be able to diagnose those coverages, especially when the Vikings just run it a ton all year anyway. But he wasn't able to, and it was just good defensive play calling by the Vikings.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the illusion of complexity. It's kind of like a buzzword. It was the phrase Kevin O'Connell used when he was first hired by the Vikings in his press conference. But I really feel like these last couple weeks, that's kind of been a driving principle for the Vikings' success. On the offensive side, they're getting into a lot of simple concepts that Josh Dobbs knows how to read, but they're doing it from different personnel groupings, different personnel looks. Like they would get into a three-level flood concept, but the Y would start out and do like a reverse pivot, and he would be the intermediate read, which is like a lot of times those flood concepts, everybody's coming from the same side or something. This way, you had guys coming, somebody coming from the backside as your deep, like your deep over route or whatever. So they're getting into ultimately that's it's the same read for the quarterback regardless. But it's a way to get into it that makes it a little bit more challenging for the defense to cover, especially like in man, those pivot routes are tough against man cover teams, which the Saints are. It's the same thing on defense. Like Brian Flores, the coverage shells he runs, it's like a lot of 2 and 3, and like you don't necessarily know if the middle field's open or closed. Like, but they're not. This isn't Donatel where they're running like cover 8 or something, where it's like really complicated corners, cover 7 stuff. Like it's a lot of like you'll see a lot of Tampa 2, cover 2, and cover 3 on defense, and it's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
but the way he's able to like use those, it's kind of like whereas Donatel last year was like a pitcher with like 5 mediocre pitches. Flores is like he's got 2 really good pitches, but they're both heaters. He's got like a really
Yeah.
good fastball and a really good changeup, and that's all. And it's the same thing. Like he'll either drop 8 or he'll bring 6, and it's the same thing with his coverage shows. It's either cover 3 or cover 2, but like you never really know which one it is, and so it leads to some holes in coverage when teams know what to do or know what they're looking for, but a lot of times they don't, or it throws them off. And I feel like it's allowed a relatively young defense with a lot of new pieces to gel and be able to like go out there and perform really well, while also making things harder for the other side. And that's kind of what all the illusion of complexity is all about. It's simple for us, hard for you. And I feel like that sort of coverage disguises. It's just like 2 invert or whatever, or like show 2 invert to 3 or whatever. That's not that complicated for a defense to execute, but for a quarterback, it can make it complicated. And then you throw in like we're showing it's a 0 look, but we're dropping 8. That's also, yeah, throw that in there. It becomes a lot more complicated to the other side, even though I'm sure Brian Flores' play sheet is really not that long or complicated compared to some of the other defenses in the league you've seen. So that's another example of like good coaching, because good coaching isn't making it complicated as possible. A lot of it is like a lot of really good coaching comes down to like really simple coaching points.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's kind of another way in which Flores is really elevating this defense. So
Yeah, the Vikings do like very similar things from like a wide variety of different looks on defense, right? And that's a good formula for success on offense. Like Shanahan has kind of mastered that, right? For the 49ers in terms of running similar plays just from different looks using unique personnel. The Vikings are that version on defense, right? Where they're running kind of simple stuff overall, right? Like they're not asking a ton of their defensive backs in coverage because it's so much zone coverage and so much safe zone coverage with like Tampa 2 and drop 8 cover 3 and stuff like that, right? Like that's not stuff you're going to get beat over the top. They don't run a ton of man coverage. They're like one of the bottom teams in the league, like 29th or something, and how often they run man coverage, right? But they're doing it from so many different looks that it throws quarterbacks off and usually makes them hesitate before they're able to make something and make it throw, and that's helping the defense perform well overall. Um, so that's been a lot. The one thing I wanted to get to is like even the touchdowns that the Saints scored in the second half. Like I don't feel like we're negative plays for the defense. Like that's just something I wanted to bring up. Like
yeah.
Byron Murphy, I think had good coverage on both of those plays. Maybe he reacts to the ball a little bit late, but he gets his hand up in the area where you want to, and the receivers just make strong plays. Like that Olave catch was absolutely absurd. The A.T. Perry catch was more of an out muscling of Murphy, more so than like just a completely absurd catch, but it was still a really, really strong catch by a player who's like 6'4" to Murphy's 5'9", right? Like, I guess
it
maybe,
was also the most insane, the
yeah,
most Jameis Winston throw ever. Like to
right.
roll out all the way to the left side of the field
And
and
it's
be like,
like,
screw it, I'm going to chuck this to the other right side. Like even the all 22 camera operators, like he's not like you couldn't see the
yeah,
catch because the camera didn't pan fast enough. It's like nobody would throw that. But both were just contested catches that like Byron Murphy got a very good contest. Like his hand was in there, and
Yeah.
on the second touchdown, it dislodged the ball. Just the receiver managed to regain possession coming down. So you're gonna lose some of those 50-50 balls occasionally, and those just happen to be two extremely costly 50-50 balls they lost. But like as like a coach, I'm sure you look at that play and are like, well, you did everything right. Just sometimes you lose 50-50 balls.
Hmm.
So I don't have like a those aren't it's 16 points because they got the 2 point conversions too. It's two touchdowns, very costly plays, but like in terms of projecting this defense going forward, those don't really make me lose any sleep at all. So I was kind of fine.
No, absolutely. Like to me, I don't think Jameis Winston was really playing quarterback. Honestly, he was dropping back and throwing the ball to his first read. Like he was just chucking the ball up, whether it was a good idea or not. I can't believe that PFF graded him kind of positively, and they only gave him one turnover worthy play because I guess they didn't consider the Mekhi Blackmon interception, which he just chucked up.
It's
Like
just a jugs machine,
like right to
spraying it downfield wherever.
it was a blitz by the Vikings, right? And when they blitz, they play very soft man coverage behind it, so you can't throw deep on him. And he just chucked it up, and Mekhi Blackman's right there. Like, that's an interception all the way. The Murphy pick obviously was bad. There was another one that he threw into coverage that should have been an interception. Like, I don't understand. Or like the Bynum one, they probably didn't count as an interception. I think that was from Winston, right? Where Bynum got the interception and they reviewed it, and it clearly wasn't a pick. Like, man, this guy was literally just throwing the ball to his first read, whether there was coverage or not. Like he just didn't read anything at all, and I don't understand how that's a way that you can play quarterback in the NFL. I mean, obviously, it's not really a sustainable way, right? He's not a starter. Uh,
In a weird way, if you're the Saints trying to claw back from a 24-3 deficit, like you probably want the guy with a 20-yard average depth of target over the guy with a five
yeah,
yard average depth of target. Winston's problem was he was just like chucking it downfield with like very bad accuracy, very big misses, and he was kind of bailed out by the talent of his receivers at the catch point, and like a little bit of luck too. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it kind of worked out for the Saints in terms of their second half performance once James got in there, but also like those interceptions also count and sealed the game for the Vikings too. And I'm not like Winston going out there and scoring a couple touchdowns doesn't concern me. I will say you're gonna get guys chucking it downfield, and I'm surprised we haven't seen this more. When you do those zero looks, you're kind of guaranteeing one-on-one coverage on the outside because even if you drop back to like Tampa 2, the safety's not going to be able to get there in time to help at all with
yep.
like a go route. So I'm surprised we haven't seen more of that, but like, so that I guess is a concern. But like Byron Murphy was able to recover really well and get
Well,
coverage on the on
so the Chargers
and
tried that
contested.
multiple times, and it hit on the one Mike Evans catch that was like an absurd catch, and Byron Murphy has stayed over the top of those on like every single route, every single time this year. I think he's been really, really effective in staying over the top of those vertical routes. So like I think that's a credit to Murphy why more of those haven't hit this season,
Yeah,
personally.
Byron Murphy clearly our best cornerback. I don't really care what PFF has to say about any of our. I don't really care what PFF has to say about cornerbacks generally, but
Yeah.
um, 'cause when you're not like if you're judging a cover two corner the same as a cover one corner, like that's just
It's
I don't know what to do with
it's
this information. It's
it's
useless to me. So
it's wild. I don't understand it at all. Like it's
like if you have to shadow a wide receiver one in man everywhere he goes coverage and you're getting like downgraded for that. Meanwhile, a cover two corner is just like I don't have the flat, I don't have the middle of the field, I don't have the back half. I'm just gonna cover my little like happy little corner here and get like an elite grade. It's like this is not helpful information. So um, I like PFF. But the just I
yeah.
see a lot of people use their grades and without context. So, um, but we saw some other good quarterback play. Andrew Booth is getting more and more run
Absolutely.
with the defense now. Caleb Evans has had some. He's had some mistakes lately, but I feel like he had a pretty good game too. And then
I
Mackay Blackman's
I
kind of
agree.
come on really strong well
I think
as well.
every single
So
corner played well in this game. And like on the stat sheet, like I get downgrading Byron Murphy for this game, right? Like he allowed two touchdowns. They were, I thought, fine plays by him, but ultimately, you're the corner, you should probably break up that pass, right? Like it's a great play by the offense, but like to me it's a great play by the offense, but I could see, saying like, hey, maybe you shouldn't have been on the downside of that. Booth, I thought, looked sticky in man coverage. Blackmon looked sticky in man coverage too. There was a particular third down rep I noticed where they both had to cover crossing routes. Blackmon was a shallow cross. Booth was more of a dig, and they both did a really good job staying in the back hip pocket of the receiver on those routes. That's a really difficult ask for a corner. It's one of the most difficult things you can ask for a corner. Obviously, I thought Booth played his zone responsibilities very tight. Blackmon, obviously, the interception, like that's great. First career interception for him. Really good to see. Evans, to your point, the very first play of the game, right, where he just or for the Saints at least, where he just absolutely wallops Michael Thomas, right, and knocks the ball loose. Like that was kind of fun on a trap coverage. I thought he played pretty well in this game. Really, I don't have any complaints about the way the corners played. On the defensive line, we already shouted out Harrison Phillips for his very nice coordinating or forcing false starts and kind of getting the blitzes to hit by confusing the offense. He's kind of in charge of that situation. But he made a really nice play on that third down run stop to set up that fourth down that we ended up forcing the false start on. He controls the center, so like it's another kind of late shift situation or stunt after the snap. Jordan Hicks, who unfortunately ended up getting injured in the game, right? He has a kind of shin thing. I forget what the name of the syndrome that he developed throughout the course of the game is, but it's not good. He ended up going on IR. Um, you know, shoots the backside A gap because Harrison Phillips crosses the face of the center to the front side A gap on the run. When Harrison Phillips crosses face, the running back, it was Jamal Williams in this case, cuts to the backside A gap, but there's nobody there to block Hicks, who has a free run, and Harrison Phillips dominates the center to the point where he's able to get back into the play anyway. So he's just been playing great in run defense. And it's really important. I've realized that he doesn't give a ton in the pass rush juice perspective, but he's got that going. And then the Hunter sack and the Wonnum sack. Like, the Wonnum sack was great. I think DJ Wonnum's playing a lot better as a pass rusher this year. I don't think, like, he's maybe necessarily a starting caliber edge, particularly because of his run defense, but I really like how he's played as a pass rusher.
Yeah, he's got some juice and some bend, which I'm not used to really seeing around him. I mean, that Saints left tackle, Andrew Speed, is that it? He had a
Yeah.
rough game, but that was a high from the pass rush planning. He looks really good out there and is really valuable. And I'm very glad that we have DJ Wonnum on those snaps, and not Pat Jones, who also can do some good things. But like Wonnum is a weapon on pass rushing downs, and that's fun to have. I also have to really shout out Daniil Hunter, who was beating Ryan Ramczyk pretty consistently throughout the game. In
Yes.
my mind, Ramczyk has an argument as the best right tackle in the game. So for Hunter to do that, and he's had his number. This isn't the first time he's been beating Ryan Ramczyk. That sack he had on a spin move was about as clean of a high quality sack against a very high level opponent as you'll see at the NFL level. So, and that wasn't his only play. I mean, PFF would downgrade this play, but the zone read with Taysom Hill in there, where Hill correctly pulls it, and Hunter, because Hunter is chasing the running back,
Yes.
and so Taysom Hill keeps it and runs to the other side, and Hunter is still able to, like, he's the conflict player, but he's still able to like chase down Taysom Hill. He misses the tackle, but the fact that like he's able to like you correctly pull it, and I'm still going to make you wrong. That's insane to do at the NFL level with like all NFL athletes are great athletes, but Daniil Hunter is in his own stratosphere. And
Hunter's
then
Hunter's tackling grade is like very bad, and it's like, dude, like his tackling
because
grade's bad because he's getting to situations that other players don't even get to. It's like the Derek Jeter. It's like the reverse of the Derek Jeter fielding thing or whatever in baseball.
yeah, exactly. So a really good player in run defense. He had a lot of other really that he beat Ryan Ramczyk with a very similar spin move on the first play from scrimmage, and it just Derek Carr was getting rid of the ball immediately. So this was a really impressive game from Daniil Hunter all around. So I just wanted to shout him out. Like Daniil Hunter, I feel like is the one true blue chip player. I mean, I wish I could say Harrison Smith were still in that category, but probably not. But like the way Flores has everybody playing together, it's like Daniil Hunter and like a ragtag misfits, but it's all kind of coming together. And they're
Yeah.
they're I think ninth in EPA per play against, which is like it's so much better than last year's defense, despite the fact that we lost Zadarius Smith, who's a good player when he's healthy, and we lost Eric Hendricks, who's also still a good player,
Yeah.
and we lost a lot of pieces. But
So
just more and more of a credit.
Not only are the Vikings ninth in EPA per play against so far this season, if you back weight it, so weight it towards the more recent games, which Timo Risk from PFF did, I saw him tweet it out, the Vikings are fifth and they're first in the NFC, right? So they're ahead of the Cowboys, they're ahead of the Niners, they're only behind like the Chiefs, Ravens, Browns, and somebody else in the AFC. I forget who it is. But it's just been a really impressive performance during the 5 game winning streak for the Vikings. One final note on that Hunter sack obviously came immediately after he got his helmet ripped off by Andres Pete. And I saw you post it. He was certainly responsible for illegal hands to the face on that play. It's not something that was visible from the broadcast at all, but you can see he gets his hands up in kind of like the neck chin area of Pete. However, you're still not allowed to rip somebody's helmet off by grabbing their face mask. I think that's a little bit illegal. And a side note, so I had originally said in response to that a 15-yard penalty overrides a 5-yard penalty. I looked in the rulebook a little bit more. That's not exactly true. In this case, they would have been offsetting penalties because the 5-yard penalty, illegal use of hands to the face, also carries an automatic first down. So because that leads to an automatic first down, the penalty, the 15-yard face mask penalty, which is what it should have been on Andres Pete. It's not illegal hands to the face. When you grab somebody's face mask, it's still a face mask from the offensive lineman. Does not offset. So like interesting rulebook quirk there in case people were interested. That 15 versus 5 non-offset does not happen all that often in the NFL. So it's kind of weird to almost see one in the wild.
Kindred Skulls getting out the rule book for you multiple times this podcast. We're doing the homework here.
Yes. Yes. So, now that we've spent an hour and 15 minutes on the Vikings Saints game, let's look ahead to the Broncos game. It's on Sunday Night Football in Denver, so the nation gets treated to another primetime Broncos game. If you guys didn't have enough from the final 2 minutes of the game last night, or Monday night, I suppose I should say. Interesting about the Broncos, they've won like 3 of their last 4 games or something like that, 4 of their last 5 games. They look, actually pretty decent on offense. Like Russell Wilson kind of has it back a little bit this year. His numbers have been very, very efficient. I do think he's taking a bunch of unnecessary sacks. That just seems to be a Russ characteristic at this point. I mean, it was just characteristic with the Seahawks, so who are we kidding there? That 2 minute, like they got completely bailed out right in the 2 minute drill. I think one thing with the Broncos is they didn't seem to have like the Bills were zero blitzing him at the end, and the Broncos didn't seem to have legit answers to that zero blitz. Like the pass interference call that Russ hucked up was against the zero blitz, but the corner bit at the sticks right in that scenario, which is not something the Vikings do. We just talked about how they play over the top, so I don't expect them to be able to just throw the ball up and get a bunch of free pass interference yards against this Vikings defense. I think they're going to have to come up with more sophisticated answers, but I'd love to see the Vikings blitz more in this game because I don't think the Broncos respond well to it, even if Russ is playing a little bit up to his normal level. And Cortland Sutton makes like some absolutely absurd catches too. Like that touchdown was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you can never underestimate a Sean Payton offense. And Russ is, I feel like people kind of wrote them off a little bit early because they were in such a funk last year and they didn't get off to a hot start this year either. But like Russ is still a good quarterback. He's always had limitations. And Pete Carroll and those offensive coordinators in Seattle are always good at like focusing on the things Russ does well and trying to minimize, the sacks that he runs into and his the way he likes to throw, moonshots down the sideline instead of, in posts over the middle of the field. So it's a good offense, and Sean Payton is, in my mind, still a top 5 play caller in the NFL, top 5 offensive coordinator. He throws a lot of different things at you. He doesn't have Taysom Hill with him anymore, but he'll break out the fullback, he'll break out the 12-13 personnel. They've got weapons who can win in different ways. Obviously, you mentioned Sutton. He's got all 4 inches of him. Good physical receiver that can be a matchup problem for the Vikings cornerbacks. Jerry Jeudy, not a complete receiver, but he's still very good at it in generating explosive separation in his routes. Javonte Williams is a very tough running back to bring down. He's got a lot of juice. They've got a good offensive line, and Russell Wilson, we know like the things he does well. He's still a very accurate quarterback. He's got a good arm, and he has limitations in how he sees the field and his pocket awareness. So I feel like they can try and take advantage of that. But at the end of the day, I feel like you can't underestimate this offense. And I feel like the defense to me is even scarier because they've got so many veteran pieces. I don't want to steal your thunder too much here, but Pat Surtain, in my opinion, is like in the elite category of cornerbacks.
Yes.
Somebody I would trust to be man up one on one against the elite wide receivers. He's very, very few of those corners that I would trust, and he's one of them, along with the Sauce Gardners of the world. Both of their safeties on the older edge, but both Justin Simmons forever has been an elite safety, and Jackson as well. Their defensive line doesn't give me as much pause. So maybe this is a game where they can try and get the run game started a little bit, or maybe this is a TJ Hockenson game because I'm not sure they have a good matchup weapon for TJ Hockenson. But like if Pat Surtain's shadowing Addison, they're not really a shadow team. They probably run a little bit more zone. Although you
Hmm.
would think if they had the horses per man, they would run it. But Vance Joseph is doing more, too high zone. I mean, he's not a Fangio guy, but it's kind of that kind of flavor of stuff. That maybe this is a Hawkinson game, but really good back seven, really good offensive bones, architecture, fundamentals, capable of doing a lot of damage. Good offensive line too. They got a lot of good pieces there. So, and it's in Denver. So the advantage we have going for us is Broncos are coming off a short week, I suppose. But like this is a good Broncos team. They're on a heck of a roll right now. They just beat the Chiefs by
Yeah.
multiple scores, and they're coming off. It was a very funky win with the Bills, but they beat the Chiefs and the Bills. So um, it is going to be another tough test for the Vikings too. So I am not surprised that Vegas has the Broncos favored. It's only -2, which I would think being in Denver it might be even more. But I don't know. I have a lot of respect for this Broncos team, even if Vegas thinks that it's kind of close to a coin flip. So they can beat you in a lot of different ways, and they've got good coaches and they've got good talent. So that's usually a combination for a good team, even if the record or the EPA per play doesn't necessarily show it.
Yeah, for sure. Like I never thought the Broncos were like the worst team in the league that many people kind of made them out to be because it was a little bit fluky in their early games and they just weren't able to convert in plays when they were still kind of having a little bit of an efficient offense with Russell Wilson. And I always kind of thought Russ was playing decent. Obviously their defense early on was very, very bad, right? Like you don't let up 70 points in a football game without just playing complete garbage defense, but they do seem to have turned it around a little bit recently. Like I don't watch the Broncos on a weekly basis, so I can't say, what exactly was the reason for the turnaround. But to your point, they've got solid secondary players, and whenever you have a shutdown corner in Patrick Surtain who can kind of shut down one side of the offense, that's really helpful. Their linebackers, Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton, like they're not household names, they're not world beaters, but I think they're solid players who have sound coverage. Like I would have liked the Vikings to bring Josie Jewell in, watching I guess a little bit of the Donatel defense, right, from the previous year with Donatel last year to kind of help learn the system and be a linebacker as opposed to somebody like Jordan Hicks, right? Um, Vikings didn't end up doing that. He's stuck with the Broncos, and I think he's a startable player. One player to watch out for on the Broncos defensive line to me is Baron Browning. Browning kind of did a reverse Anthony Barr. I guess maybe he did a Micah Parsons, right? Where he was an off ball linebacker in college at Ohio State and transitioned to edge in the NFL. He was injured for the majority, he was injured for the first. He's only played for the last 3 weeks. Let me phrase it that way. I was trying to figure out a better way to phrase it. Um, but he has 2 sacks. He had both sacks in the Kansas City game. And he's just been a dominant player. Well, dominance may be a stretch, but he's been a quality edge rusher since the Broncos moved him to the edge rush position the last couple years. So he's somebody to watch out for, particularly with the speed rush. Zach Allen on the defensive line is kind of like a if Dean Lowry was good type player, I want to
That's
say,
kind of what I
and
was going to
maybe a Jonathan Bullard plus, right, for to make Vikings comparisons specifically. They did give him a pretty significant contract. I guess it's in Denver. It's probably going to be a little bit of a colder weather game, right? Like it's starting to snow in the Denver area, in the Colorado, in the mountains, that sort of thing. So you may, and teams can overcome that, but that may be a challenge for the Vikings offense, being on a road environment where the crowd's really invested. Like, I feel like the Falcons game was a road game, obviously, and I think there were a lot of Falcons fans there. I don't think the Falcons fans are particularly energized at this point, and I don't think they did much in the game to really energize them where it was truly a difficult environment for the Vikings to play in on the road, right? The Denver Broncos, when they're rolling, can be a really difficult environment for an opposing team to play in terms of communication and that sort of thing. So I do think that might be make an impact on the Vikings offense, especially with Dobbs still being new in this offense, right? And we got to make sure Dobbs can keep rolling in terms of his hot streak right now, right? Because I think there may be a point where this comes back to earth a little bit, but we'll have to wait and see, right? We're gonna ride that wave as long as it lasts, right? So I think that's kind of what we're looking at.
Amen.
Um, two things that could help the Vikings in this game. Obviously, Jordan Hicks being out is a big deal. I think the Vikings lack a body right now to be able to take on blocks in a 5-1 front where you kind of have to take on a block from an opposing offensive lineman. Like, Pace is great at getting around blocks. I don't know if he's going to take on blocks one-on-one. So the Vikings signed old friend Anthony Barr back to the practice squad. I doubt he'll be up to speed in 1 week and like play in this game against the Broncos, but it's something to look forward to moving forward as kind of a Hicks replacement. I think he'll be a stout run defender in the middle. I don't think we should ask him to do a significant amount in coverage, but that's kind of what I thought about Hicks too, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm kind of excited to see if we can get him free on a blitz or something like the old days, right, where he's just destroying running backs on that double gap pressure. And then also something that can help the Vikings, even if Patrick Surtain is in the game, is if Justin Jefferson comes back. He is eligible to come back from the hamstring injury. The Vikings are absolutely playing it safe, and they absolutely should. But I actually kind of think there's a decent shot he's going to come back this week. I don't know how you feel about either of those two things, Nick.
Yeah, this would certainly be a great game to do it because, if you can get Justin Jefferson out there, one, how great is that? But two, like Jordan Addison versus Pat Surtain is a very different prospect than Jordan Addison versus, is it Fabian Moreau is the other cornerback
Yeah,
opposite
probably.
him? So, like that's not to mention like you can also scheme up Justin Jefferson against Fabian Moreau. Like not that Fabian Moreau is like a terrible corner or anything, but he's not Pat Surtain. So that's it would be a huge boost. So if there's a game where you could put him back. Obviously, you don't want to rush him. You want to. Justin Jefferson's far more important long term, but I feel like this is a bit of a coin flip game. Justin Jefferson could be a difference maker in this one. He's a difference maker in every game, but particularly in this one, with the secondary we're going up against, the defense we're going up against, it would be great to see him back out there this week. I think particularly so. Would be hopefully he can come back because that would be awesome. Barr I know probably won't be up there, but was one it's just the vibes
Yeah.
purely from the vibe. It's great to have Barr back. I've always loved Barr. I also think I don't want to call him washed, but he's not the player he was that obviously
Oh, for
when he
sure.
was drafted as a first rounder or signed for an extension or anything. Like Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks is another like uber athlete drafted high. And now you can clearly see teams are picking on him, designing crossers against him because he's not the athlete that he once was. Barr is the same way. I don't want him matching up in man coverage on anybody, but like, yeah, I mean, I can totally see him being like the Jordan Hicks thumper up the middle, playing, hooks in defense or, buzzing out to the flat or something. Or, and Brian Flores even mentioned like he can do a little bit of what DJ Wonnum does too. So like they could use him as a pass rusher against offensive tackles. Barr has the length and the explosion to do that too. So yeah, there are definitely ways in which I can see them fitting Barr into this defense, even though he's not exactly what he once was. And even if nothing else, it's very cool to see him back in purple. Although I saw that his number is going to be number 54, and that just feels wrong. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that
need
that hurts a lot. Like, figure something out with Andre Carter. I don't care. Like, I don't know what we have to do to get him back in 55. But like, I mean, okay. First of all, obviously we all know he and Kendricks are great friends. So on one hand, it's kind of cool that he gets to wear 54, and it's like a Kendricks thing, right? It's like a Bar Kendricks thing, which is kind of cool in my head. But at the same time, like, it's wrong, and he needs to wear 55. I don't know how we get that to work out.
Exactly, and then I can bring back out my bar jersey. So I can't. I don't want to get a bar 54 jersey. So,
Well, I got a
gonna have
Kendricks
to
54 jersey, so I'll just make do with that.
swap the names, swap the
Yeah.
letters. Yeah.
So anyway, I think with that we're gonna wrap it up for today. Lots of good content once again. We keep going long on these, but it's just a lot of fun, and there's so much to talk about with how well we think the Vikings coaching staff is doing, how interesting the Vikings offense with the Josh Dobbs situation is, and honestly how interesting the defense is, right? There's so much stuff happening with the defense. It's been great to talk about. So I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He's Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host Greg is at You've Been Gregged. We are at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube. And Skull Vikings.
Goal. Goal, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score the